So some people watching my videos may be wondering to themselves whether I really do believe that Jesus, the Son of God, actually lived and died in Japan. But I never really have spoken about my actual views and whether, in my heart of hearts, I think there's any legitimacy to the claim that Jesus lived and died in Japan. Now, I will say in the myth's defense that there are a few aspects to the Japanese Jesus story that resonate with me and I actually see as potentially plausible. And just to fill you in, according to this myth, Jesus did live in ancient Judea, but he does this gap year basically where he goes off to Japan on almost like a working holiday, and he stays with a Shinto priest as a teenager, and he learns about Shintoism and he learns about Buddhism. Now, does Buddhism exist in Japan at the time of Jesus? No. But let's just ignore that. Let's just go and say that Jesus adopts all of these Japanese customs and these philosophies from Japan, and then he takes them back to ancient Judea and he spreads these ideas around ancient Judea, and he says, you know, these are my own beliefs, and that's what Christianity is today. Christianity is nothing but a perversion of Shintoism and Buddhism. Now, you can pick holes in these arguments and these claims if you like. A lot of these facts just don't really add up from a historical perspective. But one small aspect I do see as plausible is this idea that Jesus might have had some interaction with someone from the East. I mean, the three wise men come and pay their respects to Jesus, right? They have traveled all the way from the East. Does that mean that the three wise men were Chinese, or were they Japanese? They might have been Chinese. They might have had some influence from Buddhism. But maybe Jesus had met somebody randomly during that part of the Bible that's not accounted for in Jesus's life. You know, maybe he did come across someone who was, I don't know, Buddhist, and maybe that influenced some of the things that he says and some of the Christian teachings, which are basically an evolution from Judaism. And so that's the one aspect of the whole story that I see as potentially plausible, that Jesus could have been influenced from Eastern influences. But then again, according to the Takeuchi documents, Jesus just goes back to ancient Judea and spreads these Shinto Buddhist ideas around, and he gets crucified, but he leaves the cross at the last minute, or he manages to escape and gets his twin brother Iskiri to be crucified in its place. Now, I don't know if Iskiri was happy with this arrangement. I don't know if he was actually an identical twin to Jesus. I don't think we know too much about whether Jesus had a twin called Iskiri, but apparently Jesus then goes and flees back to Japan, and he marries a local woman in Shingo village in Aomori. He becomes a rice farmer or a garlic farmer, depending on who you ask. And he lives to be over 100 years old, and he has some children. And people use this fact to go and say why there are certain people in the north of Japan who have European features. Because yes, Jesus is all of a sudden a European person, and so the fact that Jesus might have come from ancient Judea, where he was not European, he was a Semitic / Middle Eastern person. But yeah, according to the myth of Japanese Jesus, the evidence that Jesus lived in Japan is the fact that they've been able to locate certain Japanese people who look pretty Japanese, but might have like a pointier nose or something like that, or maybe they claim someone had blue eyes. And based on this, I guess, flimsy evidence, it's very hard to take these claims seriously, that Jesus was actually Japanese, or lived in Japan, I should say. It's further undermined by the fact that I went and visited the grave of Moses on that trip I went to in 2016, and you ask yourself, okay, so Moses also lived in Japan, what's the story there? And the story there is that Moses gets the 10 Commandments from the Japanese god. So he gets to the top of Mount Sinai. Is that in ancient Egypt, I think? Anyway, apparently Moses gets on a UFO, and that UFO takes him to Japan, and then he comes down and he marries the emperor's daughter, and he worships the god of, I think it's Amaterasu, and then he takes those Japanese 10 Commandments down Mount Sinai, and then those are the 10 Commandments that we're all supposed to follow today, except if you read the Amaterasu style 10 Commandments, they're not exactly the commandments that we're aware of. They're these very different commandments. And of course, we're getting our dates pretty mixed up. I think there are Japanese people at that time living in Japan. I don't know how much of a unified state of Japan exists in the time of Moses. I mean, Buddhism doesn't get to Japan until, 600, 700 AD? Quite a long time after Christ. And in terms of the emperors in Japan at the time of Moses, I don't know, but I just don't think there's too much plausibility with any of this. And you've got to think about what sort of a country Japan is in the early 20th century. There's a lot of people trying to link Japan to Europe at this time, And I guess it's similar to things that were happening in Germany in the 1930s, where they were also talking about mysticism and paganism and old mythology and searching for the Holy Grail. And I guess it's all a certain amount of cope going on. They're all trying to create a national myth, which all plays very well into nationalism, I suppose. Not that there's anything wrong with nationalism, surely. But yeah, that's basically what I see as being the origin of the story of Japanese Jesus, and why anyone talks about it to this very day, and why there's still a Japanese Jesus festival every year in the north of Japan. Now, the people at this festival, most of the people don't seem to believe and think it's just a fun day out, and I suppose it is. I do wonder how many people involved, especially the Shinto priests that you see around, how many of those people believe that Jesus was actually Japanese. Maybe some of them. I used to have this impression that it was all connected to this cult called Mahikari, or a religion called Mahikari, because I was working in an office years ago, and there was an old man who was part of this religion, or this way of life. And he was talking all about how it's just this philosophy about divine light or something, and purification. But it was later on, when he found out that I was going to see the graves of Jesus and Moses in Japan, that he got very excited and started telling me that they're all Japanese, and he started telling me that Japan's at the top of this hierarchy of peoples. And he started saying, when I came back from visiting the graves of Jesus and Moses, he was fawning over me. He said I'm blessed. He said he can feel this light coming out of me, and he was just staring at me with an open mouth, smiling gaze every time I walked around in the office scanning documents at the photocopier or whatever it was. It all got a little bit uncomfortable in the end. And yet I've got to admit that by going and doing that pilgrimage to the grave of Jesus, I just had this wonderful time. The people I met were great. I mean, I felt a little bit uneasy because I grew up as a Roman Catholic, and I get there at 10 a.m. on a Sunday when they're doing the annual Jesus festival, and you've got all these Shinto priests and these Shinto dancers going around the grave of Jesus. You know, that image of a crucifix, it's still so powerful if you were brought up as a Catholic like me. And then to see it mixed in with all of these Shinto dancers, you can't help but feel like it's all a bit pagan. And I actually had a slight sense of unease and guilt that I was attending this. Like, the Catholic voice inside me was telling me this is wrong. And of course I just laughed it off. And then very soon it all seemed right. Even when all the Japanese people said Amen, and they lifted up these cups of apple juice, you know, because they were just trying to promote apple juice, which, you know, apples grow in the north of Japan, and it was all like a marketing exercise. But, you know, it was all a wonderful experience for me, just like when I went and trekked up Mount, I forget what it's called, Mount Hodatsu in Ishikawa, which is where the grave of Moses is. It was a wonderful day out for me. I didn't see anyone as I climbed up that mountain, and I was able to run around on top of Moses' grave, and I felt great. I felt some sense of religious awe from the whole thing, whether or not the whole story was kind of bullshit. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think I'm wrong? Do you believe in the possibility of a Japanese Jesus and a Japanese Moses? Do you believe in the ancient aliens and the ancient UFOs involved? Do you believe in any of that? Do you believe that Jesus was maybe influenced from Eastern ideas, and he might have just met someone from the East and incorporated that into Christianity? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you next time.